You're listening to a Brawl Network production. This is a podcast for the best fans in the NFL.
Are you in the Mafia?
Am I in the what?
It's time for a Bills Brawl podcast.
Second down and 7. Kelly with the time. Touchdown! Bill Brawl.
Allen. Deep shot. Touchdown! On the line to Stephon Diggs.
And Thurman breaking tackles at the 22. Inside the 10. Touchdown Buffalo.
Bills Mafia, let's talk some Bills football. I'm Mike Lindsley for another edition of the Bills Brawl. Get us on Twitter at Bills Brawl, at Network Brawl, and me as well at Mike L Sports. We bring in the distinguished longtime Buffalo Bills insider and author, columnist from the Rochester Business Journal. It's my good buddy Scott Pitoniak. I've been doing this thing for a long time, covering the Bills, and you can, of course, follow Scott all over the social media platforms, including Twitter, which is his handle is at Scott Pitoniak. Scott, welcome back. Let's talk schedule, and let's talk some NFL draft in terms of what the Bills did. Welcome back. How are you?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me, Mike.
No doubt about it. Let's get into the schedule first, and then we'll kind of break down the the draft that the Bills had, which I thought wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't underwhelming, and it didn't have to be because they didn't really need to do a ton, right? And so let's start with the schedule, though. They start out with Pittsburgh. This is obviously a really hard schedule. The division will be better. The Tampa game is late. They got to play KC again. What kind of jumps out at you with this schedule?
Well, I think it's actually, on paper, and again, that's what these things are, right? They're on paper. It's an easier schedule than last year if you base it on strength of schedule, but we all know how that works out. I think when I look at this, I like the fact that there are 3 of their first, 4 games are at home. It's been a while since that's happened. And I think when you look at the schedule, it's kind of front end heavy and back end heavy. And I think finish with 3 out of 4 at home. So you've kind of got that safeguard there if you need to make hay, which they could very well need to in terms, they're going to win a division, but I think, it's slotting themselves to get, that extra home playoff game and so forth. I think that could come into play this year. So I look at that. It's a really tough stretch. Obviously, when you get in the middle of this thing, I think they've got only one home game in a 6-week span there. And I know that, Mike, everybody's going to look at this right away. And the first thing, Kansas City, Game 5. And I think they're discounting and probably just saying, they're going to be 4-0 automatic. And I wouldn't jump necessarily to that. I think it's a distinct possibility. When I look at that first part of the schedule, Washington's one of those games that bothers me a little bit because they have a much better defense than maybe people want to give them credit for. And I mean, up front, they can get at you. And so that's, to me, if they're looking ahead 4 games, they could get bitten right there. Clearly, the Kansas City one is the one that fans have circled there in Game 5, Sunday night game, everything, blah, blah, blah. Revenge. Here we go again. The AFC Championship game, redone sequel, and it's going to be a measuring stick. There's no question about it. It's at Kansas City, and it's interesting again. I think they had this last year, like Kansas City and Tennessee back to back. Although I think Tennessee, I think they're ready for a decline or a regression, I should say. Not that they're not a good team and a contending team, but I'm still not sold on Tannehill, and they lost a number of receivers, and I think, I can see that, but it's interesting. I think overall, when I look at this, Mike, I think that, I think that the division is going to be more challenging this year. The Bills are clearly the class of the AFC East. There's no question about that. Are they going to go undefeated again in the division? I don't know. I think there's potential for 1 loss and in worst case scenario 2 but I think at least one loss I can see here. Now they have Josh Allen, and so they're far ahead of anybody else in the division when you've got an elite MVP caliber quarterback like that. But I think the division is going to be better. I think every one of those teams is going to be better this year, and we all know how division games go. And, it's the familiarity breeds contempt and stuff. So, so that's kind of interesting to me. Obviously, the other thing, like we're all looking for the Tampa Bay game, the Brady thing. This is the game that, many of us had hoped for in the Super Bowl, right? Like that chance to finally, get at this guy who's tortured this franchise for so long. And yeah, he's not in New England, but do it. Doesn't matter. As long as 12 is on the field there, go do it to him. Well, it didn't happen. So, I'm sure people are circling that one as well. But it's, the other thing is primetime games. You got 4 of them again, and with the potential, in the back part of that schedule of adding some more depending on, the importance of those games down the stretch, those last 4. I could see something getting flexed. And I'm not I'm a kind of an old school 1 o'clock guy. I guess I'm kind of like the coaches, like I like the routine.
Me too, man.
But I think, Mike, this is the price you pay, right, for being really good.
For sure. Yep.
You want to be nationally relevant? Okay. You're going to go prime time, and you're going to go you're going to play on Thanksgiving at 8:20. You're going to kick off, and hopefully, we all can stay awake, from the tryptophan and stuff, not being a turkey-induced coma or whatever by the time that thing comes. But I do think that primetime games present a greater challenge. It's another challenge for good teams, because it can be really disruptive in your routine, your schedule, and so forth. I mean, it's great. Get to showcase. You get national play, and all these guys love that. They love to show off because they know they're going to be the game, and that their peers are watching. For the most part, particularly the Sunday night and and Monday night games, and of course like Thanksgiving and stuff. So, all in all, I think it's a decent schedule for them. Again, strength of schedule, and you got to take it with a grain of salt because everything changes year to year. But what are they? They're tied for 23rd. I think the Bills' schedule is, where the year before they were somewhere around 5th or 6th in terms of how challenging the schedule was. So I think that this is a team, again, it's built that's that close to getting to the Super Bowl and maybe even winning the Super Bowl. But that doesn't mean that the regular season you can just coast through it. And so there could be some toe stubbings here along the way, and maybe you go 12-5, and I mean, I've seen some optimistic members of Bills Mafia, God bless them, 17-0. They've already gone through. They've played the schedule out 17-0, and blah blah. And again, God bless you, But I think there's some challenging games here that if you don't bring it, you're going to have a tough time.
There's no doubt. I think in the schedule, I do think it comes back a little bit, and I hate in the NFL ever saying it's easier, because every game is just is difficult. Your division opponents, each other, blah blah. I'm with you. I think the Dolphins, Pats, and Jets will all be remarkably better. The difference, of course, being that Josh Allen is the quarterback, and the others are rookie quarterbacks, or you've got Tua trying to figure out in year 2. So I agree with you there. But last year this team convinced me. I used to say, in the beginning when the Bills were getting pretty good, and I started to believe, and they had that major dominating win against Seattle. And they let the Rams come back, but still had that unbelievable last drive to win it, and showed some unbelievable ability there to win those kind of games, where before it was they would never win those games. I changed. I went from, man, the schedule's really hard. Man, those teams are really good. Man, you know what? If you're really good, you can beat anybody on the schedule. And I've kind of arrived at the point with the Bills where, yeah, there's primetime games, there's this, there's that, there's difficulty, there's the Chiefs and the Bucs. Okay, yeah, But if the Bills are really good again, the Bills should beat most of these teams.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, we can go into this and, I can have them favored in maybe all but 2 games or whatever. If we did it from today, I didn't look at the Vegas odds, but I'm sure they've broken it down for every game in the season already. And I guess I could see them, they're going to be underdogs against Kansas City because it's at Kansas City and stuff. And again, I'm not overwhelmed by Tennessee, but it is in Tennessee and it's a Monday night game and whatever and stuff. So, but yeah, they're going to be favored in the vast majority, of these games. And so, yeah, it's incumbent upon them. Now, what's interesting, again, the great unknown is always injuries. They've got the Bills do have some age on this roster, and you always worry about windows closing and so forth, and if you're exposed in some areas, but I think they're in great shape. And again, keep 17 healthy and you should be in every game. I mean, even if you have some, issues on defense or whatever, he can overcome. We've seen it. He's done it. And I think that, given everything we know about Josh, I think he's going to be incredibly motivated by that Kansas City loss. But again, it's, there is a danger, like when you get good, to look ahead. Yep. It's just a natural thing. I saw it with the great Bills teams of the late 80s and early 90s. They laid some eggs in certain games, and they were clearly a superior team, to some of the opponents that, beat them, and stuff. So, that's always a danger, and it's always something you got to guard against. People can say, no, one game at a time, but it's just human nature. Let me tell you, somebody's looked at that and said, Kansas City, they're looking at that game 5 right now. And they got a score to settle, and beyond that, as I mentioned, it's that's a measuring stick, Mike, to see like, okay, where are we? Where are we with them? Are we able to get some pressure, which is going to be a big question for this team going into the season? Can they get more heat on opposing quarterbacks? And it doesn't. We've seen it. It doesn't matter who you are, including Tom Brady. If you start hitting the quarterback, making the quarterback uncomfortable, you can beat them. Mm-hmm. I mean, no quarterback has ever lived that, did not play more poorly when they're getting banged around. I'm sorry. It's never, ever, there's never, ever been a quarterback. Now, you can overcome those things. But so that's going to be an interesting thing early on. We're going to see, did the moves they make in the draft, and the development of guys on the roster right now, is that going to be enough to like finally get, answer some of these weaknesses? And again, we're quibbling because this is a Super Bowl caliber team. There's no question about it. But it's great to be at a point where we're tweaking with things and wondering, like, if they can just get this a little bit better. Wow. Think of the possibilities.
No question. Speaking of the NFL draft picks, let's get to it. Again, as I said in the beginning, nothing really overwhelming, nothing underwhelming, but I think they could have potentially gotten here, Scott. The first 3 picks, I mean, I would give them, and I can't stand draft grades, obviously, because it's just like the mocks. There's millions and millions of them, but we all do it, so I'll give you, mine. I think a B plus range for them. I think they still had a really good draft, and I think the first 3 guys really, man, do they check it all, don't they? I mean, Greg Rousseau and Boogie Basham, you get pass rushers, you check the short term, the long term perhaps, if Hughes and Addison are off the books, and these guys, maybe are a little bit better than where they actually got picked as well. And I think Spencer Brown, offensive tackle in the 3rd round out of Northern Iowa, is a guy they can kind of plug and play and develop too. I think the first 3 guys really, really could help the Bills here.
Yeah, and the beauty of this draft is, like, they didn't have to panic. They could. I look at this draft, Mike, and I see a lot of projects that have a lot of potential. And as you said, with the first 2 guys, they're very intriguing. I mean, Rousseau doesn't play he opts out COVID for a year, and understandably so, given the position that his mother was in as a nurse and so forth. But he seems to have tremendous physical capabilities, and so here's a guy that in a different situation, if he had that year and built on the previous year, which was pretty outstanding, he conceivably would have been a very high draft pick. I mean, really high in the first round, because we all know the premium on pass rushers.
Yeah.
And so the beauty there with both he and Boogie is that, these guys, you put them in the rotation. I mean, so they play 30% of the time or whatever. It's great. You don't have to force them. And hopefully in that time that they get to play, that they can be impactful players, So, but I also look at this draft, but I also look at the previous two drafts in terms of the Bills. And again, we've talked about Ed Oliver and AJ Epinesa. You need something out of them. Those guys were high draft picks. For that, now getting into the third year for Oliver and AJ's second year and stuff, got to see more, guys. Got to see more. And who knows what you're going to get. Jerry Hughes is going to be 33 come camp, and how much more are you going to squeeze out of him? You mentioned Addison, so again, I'm looking for contributions from Boogie and Rousseau. In again, limited action, and maybe it becomes even they progress as the season goes on. You got the extra game now for these rookies, right? So, but I think that that's what I'm intrigued about. I want to see not only this draft, but I think more importantly, I want to see the impact of the previous two drafts.
Do you think they went? I mean, when you go down the list here, obviously we know that the first two picks were based right away on need. The need being you got to get more pass rushers. Everyone says that about the Bills, but really everybody should say that about everyone in a quarterback league, especially with Mahomes running around and doing what he's doing, and we know what has happened in the Super Bowl with Tom Brady when you can get to him, as you mentioned. So the first two were need based with Boogie with Russo and Boogie Basham, and then from there, I mean, Spencer Brown, offensive tackle, Tommy Doyle, offensive tackle. Marquez Stevenson, by the way, who I really like. We can deep dive into him in a minute. Wide receiver, DeMar Hamlin, safety, Wild Goose, Wisconsin cornerback, Jack Anderson out of Texas Tech. Don't know a lot about him at offensive guard. Do you think they went from need to, what was the vision, do you think, after they got their guys, the pass rushers, right? Because Rousseau almost pretty much fell in their lap, and Brandon Beane admitted afterwards that Boogie Basham, they were going to trade down until obviously Boogie became available, and we're taking him. So they got guys they wanted, they fell in their lap, and they checked the box of the need to get pass rushers. But from there, what do you think the vision was? Was it more a mix of short and long term? Was it want and need? Was it something else?
I think it was. I think they went with projects. I look at all these guys.
Almost like an NBA potential type feel to it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, when I look at this, someone like Wild Goose, the cornerback from Wisconsin, he actually, even though he was the sixth round pick for the Bills, he actually might have some opportunities here because, again, you're still dealing with cornerback issues, opposite, Tre'Davious White, and maybe the fact that they didn't, go higher or whatever in terms of need at cornerback, maybe that's a vote of confidence for Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson. But I still think, and let's not forget, Mike, that there's still going to be more, maneuvers here, more additions, once guys get cut, because there's all these cap casualties, and Beane's going to have to obviously be very, very creative because the Bills are up against it, obviously, too.
For sure.
But, Richard Sherman is still out there.
Yeah.
And I know it's a long shot, but, if a guy wants to, hey, I want a shot at another ring, and this is a pretty, so if somehow he comes in and is willing to work it contract wise, you can get somebody like that. But I still think there's going to be some, some of these cap casualties that Bean's just waiting to pluck and try to make it fit into the really tight cap that the Bills have. But I think there were a bunch of projects. I think they took guys who were highly rated on their board and just went down and weren't necessarily specific on. I mean, even the other 6th round pick is a safety there, Hamlin, and could he have a shot? I mean, when I talk about age, you got Poyer and Micah Hyde are not getting any younger, and yeah, they're solid and still productive and so forth. But at some point here, you've got to address that position because you can't just allow all of a sudden if you lost both of them, let's say, or they both got old at the same time, so to speak. So I just think there's developmental guys. And again, the beauty is that they're at a point now where many of their draft picks are not going to make their team, which tells you the depth, the quality of depth that they have. Some of these guys could wind up on a practice squad. And so I think that the top part of it, and Brown is a guy, they're pretty stacked veteran-wise with their offensive line. I mean, they're essentially returning across the board their starters. So he's going to be, he's going to be having to fight for, one of those backup positions, and he's fairly versatile, so that's going to help because they're going to look for that. We saw with Mitch Morse, right? There's always the injury concussion issue with him. And then, Feliciano's got to, shift over there, and that creates other opportunities for guys. So, again, I just think, they had the luxury of, let's take a flyer on this guy. Let's take a flyer on this guy. We've got him rated highly, on a board. Let's just go with him. Yeah. And there's always surprises, but the Bills are so good now that it's, most of these guys aren't making this team. That's just the reality of it. You're going to have fewer draft picks, than you had in previous years make this roster, and that's just that's a good thing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it happens fast in the NFL. I mean, you snap a finger and something happens. You could lose an offensive tackle, the cap situation, injuries. There's a million different things that can happen that maybe you weren't in the Final Four. Maybe you weren't in the elite group, but if you were in the 1B or in the 2 category and you were a 13-3 team, like, for example, Green Bay last year, 13-3, they're 1 win from the Super Bowl. They lose Rodgers. That's a 500 team just in a snap of a finger.
Sure.
Now, that's extreme, but, let's say they lose Devontae Adams instead, right, because of an injury or something, and 2 guys on defense or 3 guys age at the same time, like you mentioned, which can happen in the NFL. I just think Bean did a really good job of crystal balling that, knowing, hey, we got good things going on here. We have a goal in mind, but, man, we really got to get some guys underneath Poyer and Hyde. We got to get somebody underneath Cole Beasley right now. They can learn from him. And one of those guys is Marquez Stevenson. I think he could be not an instant receiver impact, so to speak, but he could challenge and return some punts and kicks with McKenzie and a versatility spot as well. I think that's another great one for the Bills, and that just it fits into what they're doing across the board, checking all those boxes that they need, they want, long-term, short-term, and this guy can play all over the place, and it creates competition again, and which is a Bean McDermott staple.
Right, and I think it's going to be a tough go because I think that they've got one of the best receiving corps in the NFL, and they replaced Brown with Sanders.
Right.
It's kind of a trade-off.
Pretty
there.
Good. Yeah.
And Gabe Davis, I think has tremendous upside. But let's face it, Cole Beasley's not getting any younger, and he's coming off an injuries and stuff. So you got to wonder about that. And so for Stevenson, he's going to really have to contend. He's going to have to really show something, I think, on special teams in the return game to really to really compete for one of those spots there. But because that's one of the strengths of the team, it clearly is that. And Mike, the other thing, when we talk about the draft and where this roster is, let's not forget. To me, one of the great, and none of us saw it coming, one of the great off-season moves that made this team better was Mitch Trubisky.
Uh-huh. Yep.
I mean, you go from the guys they had, I mean, come on. This is a tremendous insurance policy. This is a win-win. Trubisky needs to, he's going to be a starter again someplace. But this is a great situation for him to be in. And this is a great insurance policy, for Josh in the event, God forbid, but in the event that something happens where he's gone for several games. This guy's accomplished. I mean, we can rag on him. He was drafted way too high. And you didn't get the value. But he had some good moments in Chicago and some good stats that he put up as well. So that's not, I mean, the drop-off is not going to be like catastrophic the way it was before with this. So I think that was a brilliant move, and it's a win-win for both player and team. Bills get what they want, an insurance policy. Trubisky gets what he wants. Hopefully he's thinking like, I'm going to, maybe I'll get some opportunities to play here, and I'm going to show you that I can, I'm valuable. Look at me plugged into a Super Bowl caliber team, and I can do the Frank Reich thing and keep this afloat, until Josh gets back and stuff. So again, you hope that you don't have to use that insurance policy, but it's such a great situation, So I think the other thing I think too is Starr coming back, on the defensive line. I mean, the Bills have, they've been run on. That can be a problem for this team. I think he's going to eat up some space, and after doing the COVID, opt-out and stuff, I think having him back, I think is going to help that defensive line because Oliver is undersized when they use him inside and so forth and whatever. But so I think they're in really good shape. I really do. And again, who knows what happens with injuries or whatever, but as long as Josh is firing away again, they've got a great chance to take that next step.
No doubt. I'm hoping Star Lotulelei comes back from sitting out from Corona and basically is how Buster Posey has been for the Giants, just coming back and bombing home runs, and his knees look fresh and he looks super fast all of a sudden on the base paths. I'm like, maybe Lotulelei will use the layoff and have a career year for the Bills coming back. Scott Pitoniak, the longtime insider, author, columnist, Buffalo Bills, just has covered him for decades and done a great job doing so. At Scott Pitoniak on Twitter, and of course get him at the Rochester Business Journal website as well. Check out all of his articles there and buy all of his books online where books are sold as well. Scott, thanks so much.
Hey, Mike, thanks. It's always a pleasure being on with you.
I'm Mike Lindsley. You've been listening to the Bills Brawl. Make sure you do download, subscribe, and leave some feedback for us on all the major platforms, all a part of the Brawl Network. Get us on Twitter, at Network Brawl, at Bills Brawl, and me on Twitter as well, at Mike L Sports. Huge thanks again to Scott Pitoniak for talking some Bills football here on Bills Brawl. As I always tell you, enjoy the games.